Alright guys, welcome to this Python game development video series, and we'll be using the famous pygame library of Python to create this cool Space Invader game. And we are going to go really in depth into this pygame and learn about a lot of different concepts, and specifically we'll be learning a lot about like new parts of Python that we haven't explored yet, and new parts of pygame like moving characters, shooting bullets, and understanding game concepts like game loops and stuff like that. So if you haven't ever created a game, or you have only created a very basic game, this would be a very good starting point for you guys. So before we get started on all of that cool stuff, learning about game development and stuff like that, we should make sure that the basic stuff is installed. So first basic stuff is obviously Python. So if Python is not installed, if you're using Python for the first time, just go to python.org and then click on downloads and just download the latest version of Python. After downloading Python, we are going to be using IDE, which is basically a cooler way to write code of Python. So I'm going to be using PyCharm. And if you don't want to buy the professional version, although you have a 30-day trial, which you can use for this course, but if you don't want to buy it, just download the community version, which is free, and you won't need more than the community version. But if you're using something like Sublime Text or maybe the main Python terminal, that's also fine. It won't matter. But if you want to follow along completely, make sure that you download PyCharm. And thirdly, you can just have a look at the pygame website that we are going to be using to create our game. So you can just have a look at it. It's not really necessary, but you can just have a look at what has been done with this pygame and look at the games maybe, and just kind of get ideas. So let's get started. Make sure that you have downloaded PyCharm. After you have downloaded PyCharm, it will look somewhat like this. Now that we have everything installed, we need to make sure that we have this new project over here. So for that, just go to File, click on New Project, and then write down the project name over here. I've already created the project and I'm calling it Space Invader because this is the game that we'll be creating. And probably you've already played this game when you were a child, but the main idea is that there's a ship at the bottom and it's going to hit the enemies that are at the top by shooting a bullet. And every time you hit an enemy, your point increases and the enemies slowly come down. And if it touches the spaceship, you lose, and the final score is how many enemies you have shot. So that's the basic idea of the game, but you'll understand more as we go through the videos. So after you have created this project, we are going to create a new file over here, and we're just going to call it main, because most of our code is going to go inside this main.python file. And after that, we need to install pygame. So if you're using terminal, you can just open up your terminal by typing in cmd, and you can just type in pip install pygame. And this is for people who are not using PyCharm, or you are using something else like Sublime Text or Python terminal. But if you're using PyCharm, what you would do is you would go to File, and then you would go to Settings, and in Settings you would go to Project Name, whatever name you have given. If you want to follow along, call it Space Invader, and then go to Project Interpreter, and over there you can see I've already installed pygame. And if this pygame is not already installed, just go to this plus sign over here and search for pygame. Just write pygame, and then you can select it and click on install package, and this will install pygame onto your computer. Now I've already installed pygame, so I'm not going to install it again. And after that, you can just type in import pygame, and if this doesn't show an error, that means that pygame is installed on your computer. So guys, this is pretty much it. This was a pretty small video, just an introduction video. We are going to be doing a lot of cool stuff. From the next video, we are going to be creating our game. We are not going to go into theory and stuff. We are just going to start with practical stuff and actually start creating a game. So we are going to be creating a game window next time. So as you can see, this PyCharm has a window right now. So we are going to be creating this kind of a window in the next video with the cross button over here. So I'll see you over there. And just to recap, what we did in the last video was install pygame, and in this video we are going to be creating our first Python game window using pygame. So obviously the first thing we need to do is import pygame into our program, and hopefully you have already created this main.py file. If you haven't, just create it right now. And first of all, we are going to import pygame, and then we need to initialize pygame to access all of the cool methods and all of the other stuff that is inside this pygame module. So to initialize this pygame module, what we need to do is just type in pygame.init. So whenever from now on you create a game or create a new game, just make sure you add this line, otherwise your Python or pygame code is not going to work. So let me just add a little bit of comment over here saying initialize the pygame. All right. So after initialization, we have to create our screen, and pygame makes it really easy. It's just one line of code. It's crazy. So we're just going to write screen, and this is our variable, and we can just write pygame, and this is to access the methods that are inside this pygame module, and we need to access the display.setMode method, and then inside these brackets we need to add another bracket. So this is a tuple. Make sure you add another bracket inside it, otherwise it's not going to work. And a lot of people mess up over here and then ask, why is it not working? It's because you haven't added another bracket over here. And then inside it is gonna take in two values, the height and the width of the window that you want to create. So I'm just gonna give it for now a value of 800 pixels of height and 600 pixels of width. So this should be good. And let me just add a comment, create the screen, and let me just format this properly. So this is all you need to create a screen, but as you will see after we run this program that it has one main bad thing about it. So as you can see, the game window was created, but after a few seconds it just went away. Let me show it to you guys again. So after we click on play, it stays there for like 1 or 2 seconds, then it goes away. And this is because our Python program goes through these 3 lines and then just exits the program, and therefore you can't see that screen for a long time because it just takes 1 or 2 seconds for this program to run, and that's it. So one way to bypass that is just create an infinite loop over here, and this also has problems, but just to show you guys that it works, I'm gonna do it. And I'm gonna make sure that my task manager is open because this will hang my computer. So make sure that your task manager is also open because this will hang the window at least that you're working on. But just to show you guys, I'm gonna run this and you'll be able to see that the window is there, but it is totally hanged. So you can see the window is there, but nothing is working over here, and this cross button is not working. So let me just go back over here and close my Python window, click on end task, and it has been closed. Now, why is it hanging? Why is it not just closing down by pressing this cross button? It is because we don't have an event of a quit function over here. So there is no way to quit the program. Our program is just inside this while loop and it's never able to end, and Windows makes sure that that program gets hanged. So that's why we need to add a quit functionality to our pygame game window. Just like this window has, on pressing this close button, this window closes. So for that, we are going to be using something known as events. Now we'll get into events more a little bit later, but for right now, just understand that event is anything that is happening inside your game window. By game window, I just mean a window inside which your game is being played. So anything happening inside that game window is basically an event. So for example, if you press arrow keys or anything on your keyboard, you move your mouse, that is an event. And even when you press this close button, that is also an event in pygame. So this pressing of the close button is actually known as a quit event in pygame. So we are going to make sure that we exit this loop when this close button is pressed. So for that, what we are going to do is we are just going to create a variable. Let's call it running, and we are going to give it a value of true. And inside this while loop, we are, instead of just typing in while true to make it an infinite loop, we are just going to call it while running. And whenever we want to break outside of this infinite loop, we are just going to turn the variable of running into false, and it will automatically break this while loop. So if you don't know the basics of Python or programming, basically while true runs infinitely, and when this value of true is turned to false, it comes out of the while loop. But we are not going to go into much into that because that's just like very basic programming. So anyways, after writing while running, what we need to do is go through the list of events that are happening inside our game window. So for that, we are going to create a for loop and create a variable event. And then we are going to loop through all of the events that are happening inside our game window. How do you do that? Pygame makes it really easy. Just type in pygame.event.get and then brackets, and this makes sure that all of the events that are there that are happening get into this pygame.event.get, and then we can loop all of these events using the for loop and one by one check if this cross button has been pressed. And whenever this cross button is being pressed, we'll just turn this while loop into false. So this is pretty easy. So inside this for event, we are gonna check if the close button has been pressed. And how do you do that? You just type in if event dot type equals to, and then we are gonna check whether the event in pygame is quit or not. If it's quit, then we are gonna change the value of running into false. So this is pretty easy. So we have changed the value of true into false whenever the close button is being pressed, and this close button is basically a quit event, and we are going to loop through all of the events to find this quit event. So we are going to go into more into events a little bit later, but for right now, just understand this is what we are doing. So let's just play this and understand whether it's working or not. Let's see. So right now you can see that video system is not initialized. It's giving us an error. It says pygame.event.get. All right, so the problem is that we have misspelled this. It's not pygame.small letters quit, it's just pygame.quit, and that's pretty much it. So when you are dealing with a lot of syntax, you have to make sure that you write the correct one, but small problem. We are just gonna click on play, and now you can see that this is working and our window is not going anywhere. The computer is not hanging. It's looking pretty good. Alright guys, let me just go through this once more what we are doing over here. So we have created our screen, we have initialized our pygame, and then over here we have created a game loop. So let's actually call it the game loop over here. We're just going to add a comment which says game loop. So this is an infinite loop which makes sure that the game is running always and the window doesn't close down. And whenever we want to do something like move a bullet or move a player or something like that, move a human being inside a game window, we have to make sure that we do stuff inside this while infinite loop, which only exits when this close button is pressed. And we have implemented that close functionality over here by getting the events, all of the events using this pygame.event.get method. And then we are looping through all of the events. So if more events are added, for example, if somebody presses an arrow key to move forward, that is also going to be looped in this pygame.event.get loop. And then we can add another condition that if arrow key is pressed, move that player, but more of that in the future. For right now, just understand we looked at if event.type equals to pygame.quit, and then we change the running into false to make sure that we come out of this while loop. And I know guys, I'm repeating a lot of stuff right now, but this is like the basics of game development. So I want to make sure that you guys understand it properly. Anyways guys, this is pretty much it for this video. In the next video, we are going to change the title and add some stuff into our game window. So I'll really look forward to that. So right now it's just black and it's just saying pygame window, which is not cool. So we are going to look into that in the next video. I'll see you over there. So in the last video, we learned how to create this game window using pygame. So this window is a little bit not personalized because it says pygame window over here. The background is weird. The logo is not there. So in this video, we are going to be learning about three main things. So first thing is how to change the caption of this window. Instead of pygame window, we'll make it something like Space Invaders. We are going to learn how to change the logo of this window. Right now, it's like a snake or a turtle or something like that. And how to change the background color of this window. Now these three things are very basic but obviously very important when you're creating a game. So let's get starting on that, and first thing we are going to do is obviously just comment that so that you guys can come back to this code and look what's happening. So we are going to write a comment, title and icon, and after that we are going to change the caption or the title of our window, and pygame makes it very easy. You just write in pygame.display because we are meddling with the display of our window, so we have to write in .display and then .set_caption, and then it requires the title of the window. Let's just call it Space Invaders because that is what we are creating. And then we are going to create the image. So you must have been seeing this UFO.png image over here. We are going to be using this image. In just a second, I'm going to show you how you can get this image. But before that, let me just add this icon inside our program. So for that, this is also very easy. First of all, what you can do if you want to get the same image is that you can go to this website known as flaticon.com and then search for spaceships or any kind of icon. So I've searched for spaceship and I got this cute UFO icon. So to download this, you can just click on download collection and make sure that you select PNG and then 32 by 32 pixel size. So whenever you're working with an icon in pygame, make sure you select the 32 into 32. I haven't experimented with 24 or 16 pixels. It might work, but I'm just gonna go with 32 into 32 pixels. You can select any other icon if you want. So I selected this icon and I just downloaded it into my project, and here is ufo.png. Now to add this inside our Python program, it's pretty easy. You just type in icon equals to pygame.image, because we are using an image, so we are going to be using the image module that is inside pygame, and then dot load. We want the image to load, and then we just write the name of the image. So in my case, it's ufo.png, so we are going to use that ufo.png. And then the next line is pretty simple. We are going to use this same dot display that we did with the title, and we're just going to write that over here, and then just set it's not showing, but I think it's set underscore icon. So you can use that, and then you just type in the variable name of icon over here that we have created, and this will make sure that the icon has been added. So let's just run this and see if it's working or not. So as you can see, the icon is also working and the Space Invaders is there. So this is looking pretty good. We have learned how to add an image, not exactly an image, just a icon over here, and change the title of our window. So this is looking pretty good. The third thing we need to learn is how to change the look or the background of our window. So for that, we need to use something known as screen.fill. So we are going to go inside our while running loop, and over here we are going to write screen. So anything that you want to be persistent inside our game window, that you want to make sure that appears continuously, it can be an image or it can be some text, it has to go inside this running infinite while loop. That is why we are going to change the color inside this running infinite while loop. So we're going to just write screen.fill, and then inside this we are going to create a tuple. Make sure you add another bracket inside this. So there are 2 brackets, and then you give it 3 values of RGB. So we are going to give it, I'm going to explain what RGB is in just a second. I'm just going to give it a value of 000 right now. Just to understand, this RGB means is red, green and blue. And basically every color in this world is made up of these 3 values, and one more you can say opacity, but let's not go into that. So RGB basically stands for red, green and blue, and this is the values. These are the 3 values that you can use to basically implement any color on the screen. So this makes sure, and this value goes from 0 to 255, so you can make it 255 but not more than that. And you can use it in a combination. So let's say we want just a pure red color, so we'll say red we want 255 and then green 0 and blue 0. And similarly, if you just want a green color, we can say 0 to 55 and blue as 0. Now what if we wanted a light green color? We can lower down this value to maybe like 150, so this will be a lighter version of pure green. So this is how it works basically. And just to show you guys a more better version of RGB, or what you can do with RGB if you haven't understood it properly, let's go to Google and you can just type in color to RGB and go to any website, but I'm just going to go to this Rapid Tables website, and over here you can see these RGB values. So obviously I told you red is 255.00, lime is 255.00 this, and similarly and so on. So let's go with this red color right now, and you can choose any values. And there are a lot more colors. You can even make your own colors by trying out different 3 values. So just experiment with it a little bit. So I'm going to just choose the red color. So we are going to go back to our code and I'm going to write down 255. But this is not going to work, even though we are going to try it, but this is not going to work, just telling you in advance. So you can see that it's not working, it's just a black screen. So over here we need to use something known as update. So right now our display is not updating. So that's why pygame provides a method known as display update to make sure that if we add anything inside our display window, it gets updated inside this while running loop. So for that it's pretty easy. Just make sure that you add it after every game. So it's pygame dot display. So let's just write display dot update, and that's it. So you have to add a couple of lines inside your Python game code. The first line is this init line, and obviously you need to make a screen, but 2 lines that are always going to be there is this init line, and the The second line that's always going to be there is this update line, because you want to update your screen because your players is going to be moving, the bullets are going to be moving, the enemy is going to be moving, the score is going to be changing. So you want to make sure that your display is always updating. And by display, I just mean the game window that we are working on. For this program, it means this screen variable. So anyways, so now we have updated it. Let's give it a shot. Let's click on play. And as you can see, now it's in red color. So it looks good. We have changed the title, we have changed the logo, and our screen is updating to red. So I don't like red. I just wanted to show you guys that you can change the color, and maybe we'll change it to something a little bit more funky in the later videos. Right now, I'm just going to go with black, that is 000, and that's pretty much it. So guys, I'll see you in the next video where we are going to be finally adding images and our player, that is maybe a spaceship some kind, inside our game window. And so I'll see you over there where we are going to learn how to add images inside our game. So peace out. So in the last video, we learned how to add a caption, add a logo, and how to change the background screen of our game window. In this video, we are going to learn how to add an image to our game window, which is pretty cool and pretty easy because of pygame. But first of all, let's look at the player PNG, which we are going to add inside our game window, which is kind of a spaceship which is shooting beams out of its arms. So if you want this image, you can just go to flaticon.com and download this image. Obviously, you can use any other image you want, but I'm just gonna stick with this image, and you can go to download collection and obviously search for arcade space over here if you want this exact image, and then choose PNG and choose the 64 by 64 pixel. Obviously, you can resize it in pygame, but I have seen that it's better if you already get the image of the size that you want. In this case, I want the 64 by 64 pixel version, so I'm gonna take that, and I've already added it to my project over here. So after you have done that over here, then you can come back and we can start adding the image. But before we even start that, I just want to discuss what is this 800 and 600 I have put over here. I've already discussed this, but this 800 is the width and the 600 is the height. I think I might have said something wrong about this in the starting videos. This 800 is actually the width and not the height, and the 600 is the height. So if you look at our window, this is the x-axis. You can think of this window as an x and y axis window. So if we go from left to right, this is an x-axis, and if we go from top to bottom, this is a y-axis. So it always starts from 0, 0, which is at the top left corner, and then as we go on the right hand side, the x value starts to increase, and on this top right corner, the x value is 800 because that stands for width. And now if we go from top to bottom, the value of y increases while the x value remains the same. So over here, the value is 600, but the value of x is 0. So if you don't understand it a lot, don't worry about it. Just think of it as this left to right is basically x, and the value right now of this whole window is 800 in terms of its width, and the value from top to bottom is 600. And the value at the bottom is 600, and if you want to go into the middle, it's approximately 300. Not approximately, exactly it's 300. So why I'm telling you this, because we want to place our image in a particular position, so that's why we need to give it exact coordinates. Obviously, you can experiment with coordinates a little bit, but we'll go into it. So let me just add a comment over here so that we know that we are talking about the player, and then we need to add the player image, which is pretty easy, like we have done it in terms of the logo. So let's just copy and paste this over here and change the UFO to player.png, and then we are going to give it the x and y axis where we want the image to be positioned. So let's create two more variables. Let's call this player x, and we are going to give it the value of 370. And I'm going to go into why we give these values to player x and player y. So these variables basically represents the coordinates that we want. And over this, we are going to give the y the value of 480. So why have we done that? So if we look at this window, we want the player image to appear somewhere over here, which is exactly the half of the screen width. So we want it to appear at the starting of the game at least. We want it to appear in the middle. and we want it to appear in the lower half of this window. So the y-axis should be closer to 600 because this point is 600 if you guys remember this lower part. So we want it to appear a little bit above it, so we can give it a value of about 480 or 450, whatever you guys want. And then the x value we are giving it 370, which is a little bit less than half of the width. So the width is 800, and if we go a little bit less than this is 370, because we have to consider the size of the image itself. If we give it exactly the value of 400, then it's not going to fit perfectly. That's why we have given these values. So you can see that the 370 is somewhat half of 800 and this 480 is close to 600. Obviously, when we change the values, you'll understand this concept a little bit better, and feel free to change these values and see the effect it has. Now after this, we are just going to create our function and we are going to call it player. Now I'm going to go into why we are creating a function, but let's just create the function for now. And then we are going to use a method known as screen.blit. So blit basically means to draw. So we are drawing an image of player onto our screen. And this screen is actually known as the surface of our game. We'll go into what it is a surface a little bit later. I know I'm saying that a lot, but it's not relevant to this video, but just understand that we are drawing this image of player.png on our game window by using this method known as .blit. And .blit actually means to draw. So after loading the image, you also need to draw it on the screen. So that's why we are using this screen.blit method, and over here it requires two parameters or values. The first value is of the image itself, so we are going to give it the image, and the second thing it requires are the coordinates. So we are going to give it the coordinates of player X and player Y, so the X and Y coordinates. After this, we are going to call it I'm just going to ask you guys a question. Where do you think we should call this player? We want this player to appear in every frame of the screen. We don't ever want this player to disappear. If you guys said inside this while loop, you guys are correct. So we are going to call this player method inside over here. So let's just call it, and we're going to just call it over here like this. And make sure that this player method is called after this screen.fill method. Otherwise, this player won't appear on the screen. Why do you think that is? This is because the screen is drawn first, and then on top of the screen we draw a player or a spaceship. If the opposite was true, then the spaceship would be drawn underneath the screen, not the skin, but then it would be drawn underneath the screen. So that is why we always want it to be drawn after screen.fill. Actually, let's remove this position from there to over here somewhere, so that we guys know where this so because we are going to be adding a lot of images and stuff, that's why we need to make sure that this screen.fill is just above everything and all the other things are drawn on top of the screen. Alright guys, so this is pretty much it. Let me just add another comment. I don't know where it disappeared. This standard for RGB and red, green, blue, just to make sure that you guys still remember what this is. Alright, so this is looking pretty good and our player should appear on the screen. So let's run it, and then we'll just go through all of this stuff again to see what is happening. Alright, so as you can see, our image has appeared on the screen. So first we loaded the image in this player image variable. We pointed out the X and Y values, and the X and Y values were dependent on the screen size that we gave over here, 800 and 600, because we wanted it to appear in the, let me just close this one, the old one. Alright, and because we wanted it to appear in the middle, that is why we gave it the value of approximately half of the screen. So for example, if I gave it the value of, let's say, just to experiment, let's say we gave it the value of, let's say 750, that is close to right hand side, and we reloaded it, and let's wait for it to appear. As you can see, it appeared on the right hand side. So you can see that the X value has increased, and similarly if we decreased it to, let's say, about 30, I'm just showing you this to guys so that you guys can understand the X and Y positions clearly. You can see that it appears on the left hand side. So let's change it to back to about 370, and similarly in Y, if we change this to maybe 30, you will see that it appears on the top of the screen instead of at the bottom of the screen. So as we go down, we are getting closer to that 600 value. So we are going to from 0 to 600. So let's change it back to 480, and hopefully now you guys have understood properly the meaning of this X and Y axis. So anyways, after that we created this function known as player, and inside that we drew this image onto the screen, and it required two values, the image, the X and Y coordinates. And then to make sure that this player is always shown on the screen, we added it to this while game loop, infinite loop. So guys, this is pretty much it for this video. I might be repeating a lot of things a lot of times, so it might be a little bit irritating for some guys, but hopefully you guys understood it properly. In the next video, we are going to learn how to move this player from left hand side to right hand side using our arrow keys on our keyboard. So that's going to be really exciting. Let's wait for that. So I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. In the last video, we learned how to add an image inside our game window. In this video, we are going to learn how to move this image left, right, or top or bottom. So basically, we are concerned about the movement of an object inside our game window, or anything that we draw. It can be image, it can be an text. After you watch this video, you'll understand how the mechanics of movement in a game works. So just to make sure that you guys understand it, I've created an image so that you guys can understand what we are going to do and the basics of movement of an image or anything that you want. So obviously we have created a game window. This is our game window. It is 800 wide, that is 800 x-axis, and then it's 600 is height, that is, you can see this as y-axis. And our spaceship currently is at 370 pixels, as we have added this over here, that is the player X is at 370 pixels. Now if we go back to our image, what if we wanted this image to move from over here to over here? We can just add 5 pixels to our already existing 370 pixels, and this image will move in the right hand direction. And now what if we added 5 pixels continuously? So this 5 pixel will, if we add it continuously, this image will continue to move towards the right hand side. So for example, we can add a functionality which adds 5 pixels to our existing 370 pixels in a while loop, some kind of a while loop, and this will happen continuously after every iteration of our loop. Similarly, if we want to move it to the left hand side, we can just decrease some value from our 370 pixel value, that is, we can decrease some player X value, and it will move towards the left hand side. And similarly, if we want to move up, we can subtract some Y value. So currently the Y value of this is 480. So if we subtract some value from this 480, it will move towards up direction, and if we add some value, it will move in the downward direction. So adding and subtracting values from X and Y coordinates of a current position of the object, or in this case spaceship, can lead to a movement of that object, and we have to add it to a while loop because we want it to happen continuously. So if we go back to our code, we need to add one thing before I can show you guys how we can add values to our player X and player Y, or how we can subtract it. So before that, we need to make some changes because currently there is no way to manipulate the X and Y coordinates from our while running loop. And if you didn't understand what I meant by this over here, don't worry about it. When we actually write the code, you'll understand what is happening and what I mean by increasing the X value to move it towards the right hand direction. Basically, if you move it very quickly, it won't seem that the image is moving. It will just seem like that the spaceship is continuously moving because of the effect of persistence in our eye. We can't see things that are happening very quickly like magicians do. They create illusions by moving things really quickly, and the persistence in our eye tells us that the image hasn't been erased and then created over here. It just assumes that the image has moved on the right hand direction if we are adding the 5 value to our already existing X coordinate. So anyways, we need to do something so that we can manipulate the value of player X and player Y from the running while loop. So what we can do is go to this def player function and over here add X, Y, so that we can send in the values of the new X and Y coordinates that we want, and then instead of player X and player Y, we can just add X and Y, so that the values that we send to this player, instead of the last values that it got from player X and player Y, instead of that, the new values that we send in of X and Y are being shown on the screen or being drawn on the screen. So now we have to go back to the place where we are calling this function. So over here right now, let's just write in player X and player Y, and you will see that there has been no change. So let me just exit this first and then play it again. Let's play it. So you'll see that there has been no change because we are not manipulating the player X and player Y value right now. So let's go through this once as to what's happening over here. So first it goes to this code, it creates the spaceship, then it takes the coordinates of the X and Y of the player or the spaceship, and then there is this player exchange. Let me remove this right now, we don't need it. And then if we go down, we have created this function of def player X comma Y, and then this is being drawn on the screen. So this code hasn't been executed yet because it is inside this while running loop, but the program just sees that this exists. Now when we go down over here, then this player thing is called, and it takes the player X and player Y value from here and sends it to this def player function, and inside X and Y currently the 370 and 480 exists. So this image is being drawn at this coordinate. Now what if we change the value inside a while running function? So for example, let's say we increase the value of player X by something small. Let's increase continuously by 5. So this will move really quickly and you won't be able to see the image moving towards right hand side, but I just want to show it to you guys for the speed. So you can see how quickly it moved. I hope you got it. Just to slow it down, I'm just going to give it the value of 0.1 so that you guys can see it properly, and you will see that it is moving in the right hand side direction slowly. So why is this happening? So every time this while loop is running, the player X coordinate increases by 0.1, and this value is sent over here in this function, player function, and then it is sent to this new player function, and the new image is basically drawn on a new coordinate and the original image is being removed. So for example, let's also just let's make it 0.2, and this time we are also going to print out the value of player X so that you guys can see that the player X value is increasing from our original value. So over here you can see that it's being increased by 0.1 and it's going on. So let's stop it right now, and let's actually try it to move it in the left hand side direction. So let's give it a minus value of 0.1. So now we want to decrease the value. So instead of increasing the value, we want to decrease the value and move it towards the left hand side. So let's play it again this time, and hopefully let's just remove the print function because we don't need it. So now let's play it, and you can see it's moving towards the left hand side. And similarly, if we do, instead of the X coordinate, we do the Y coordinate and decrease this value, is going to go towards the up direction. So let's reload it, and you will be able to see that it's moving towards the up direction. And similarly, if we add stuff, it is going to go down. So hopefully you guys understood the mechanics of a movement of an object. Just to reiterate, why is this movement happening? Why is when we are decreasing the value in Y, it's going up? So because at the bottom, the value of Y coordinate is 600. So if we decrease the value, it is going up. So over here, it's about 480. And if we decrease it more, it's going to go towards the up direction. And similarly, if we increase it, it's going to go below more than 600 coordinates. So right now you can see there are some fallacies with this system. Right now we can't control where this is going, and you'll be able to see that it just goes outside the screen. So we need to do a couple of things. First, we need to make sure that we can control this movement of the spaceship in the left and the right hand direction using our arrow keys on the keyboard. And the second thing we need to do is add a boundary so that the spaceship doesn't go beyond our game window. Right now it's just disappearing by going outside the game window. So we'll be handling these two things in the next and the coming videos. So in the next video, we are going to learn how to add keyboard support to our game. So basically we are going to control our spaceship using arrow keys, and that's going to be really exciting. So I'll see you in the next video. This is pretty much it for this. In the last video, we learned about the movement mechanics of the objects in our game window. So for example, if we do player Y equals to minus equals to 0.1, then it will move in the up direction. So if I run this main, you can see that our spaceship is moving in the upward direction. But right now we don't have any way to control this spaceship. We can't control it using our keyboard, and this is exactly what we'll be learning in this video. So what we'll be doing is that when we press the left arrow key on a keyboard, the spaceship is going to move towards the left hand side, and when we press the right hand side arrow key, then our spaceship is going to move on the right hand side. So what is the algorithm to do that? So first of all, we are going to check whether any keystroke is being pressed on our keyboard, and after we check that, we are going to check whether the keystroke pressed is either left hand side arrow key or the right hand side arrow key. So we are going to do that. So let me just write down an if condition. Let me just remove this over here. We don't need it. So after that, let me just tell you one more thing. So any keystroke that is pressed on a keyboard is actually an event. And as we have discussed before, that an event is anything that is happening inside a game window, any kind of input control. So for example, if we move a mouse, we click somewhere, we close this window, so this is a quit event. And similarly, whenever we press any keystroke on our keyboard, it is a keystroke event. So for example, every event gets logged inside this pygame.event.get, and we loop through all the events that are being stored inside it. And then after every iteration, so for example, let's say in the first iteration of this while loop, a keystroke is not being pressed, but on the 10th iteration, a keystroke is being pressed, then it will get stored inside this pygame.event.get, and we'll be able to loop through that and check whether a keystroke has been pressed or not. So inside this, I'm just going to write an if condition, which says, actually before that, let me just add a comment so that you guys understand what we are doing. I'm going to write if keystroke is pressed, check whether is right or left. So this is basically what we'll be doing, not keystroke, or keystroke. Oh, gonna mess up my spellings, huh? All right, keystroke. Can't get the spelling right, but it's all right. So anyways, how do you check whether a keystroke is being pressed or not? Pygame makes it really easy. It's kind of an event which is pygame.keyDown. So this basically check if any keystroke, it doesn't have to be left or the right, it can be alphabet A, even backspace or space. It basically checks if any keystroke is being pressed. So first we are going to do that. We are going to write if event.type, which we did inside this if condition. So we have to go actually inside this for loop. So we'll just press this tab button over here. Let's press this. So now we are inside this event for loop, and now we are looping through all the events that are there. And if the event dot type is equals to pygame dot key down, then this means that a keystroke has been pressed on a computer. And now we have to check whether the keystroke that was pressed is left or right. So this is also pretty easy. We just again type event dot this time we type in dot key because we want to find out the key that is being pressed, and we just type in pygame dot key left, and this will just check whether the key that is being pressed is the left arrow or not. If that is the left arrow, let's just for right now print left arrow is pressed. And after that, I'm gonna write again, I'm just gonna copy and paste this over here like this, and over here I'm just gonna write right, and instead of k_left, I'm gonna add the right. All right, so basically what this does is it checks whether any keystroke is pressed, and then it checks whether the keystroke that is being pressed is left or right. And after that, we are gonna check when the keystroke is being released. So after pressing down on the left arrow key, when we remove our finger from that left arrow key, that is known as the removal of the keystroke or the key up. So key down is pressing that key or pressing any button on the keyboard, and key up is basically releasing that press. So we are going to check for that over here. If event dot type is equals to pygame dot key up. So hopefully we'll be able to find that key up over here. And then over here, we are just going to check if it was the left key or the right arrow key, and then we are going to print something. So that is pretty simple. We can just copy this from here. Let's copy this, paste this, and we are going to give a condition that if the left or the right arrow key was pressed. So we can just copy this from here and put this colon mark. And then over here, we are just going to write keystroke has been released, just so you guys know what is going on. And I want you to write this code down and then actually try it out yourself so that you guys know what's happening behind the scenes. So now we can just press on play, and over here it's going to do nothing, but on our print screen over here, we are printing all of these things. So let's press the left arrow key and see if something happens. So we have to first activate our window over here, and then we can press the left arrow key, and you can see that the left arrow is pressed, and when I remove my finger, it says keystroke has been released. Now what if I keep pressing on the left arrow key? If I keep pressing, it will just say left arrow is pressed and the keystroke has been released. And similarly, if I press the right arrow key, it says right arrow is pressed. But if I press any other key, it prints nothing. So let's actually print a statement over here too. Let's say a keystroke is pressed, so that we know when any other key is pressed, it also runs. So over here, we can just press the left arrow key again. As you can see, a keystroke is pressed, left arrow key is pressed, and keystroke has been released. But if we press something else, let's say enter, it just says a keystroke is pressed and not the left and the right arrow key. And that means that our keyboard strokes are working. So now we can just minimize it, and we are going to create a new variable over here, and this will signify the change that we want in X. So if we want the X to move in right hand direction, we need to add value to this 370 existing value, and if we want it to move on the left hand side direction, we need to decrease value from it. So I'm gonna just call it over here, create a new variable and call it player x underscore change equals to, and right now I'm gonna give it a value of 0, and inside our if conditions, when the left key is pressed, I want it to increase by 0.1, and when decrease by 0.1, and we can change this 0.1 number. It basically signifies the speed with which you want the object to move. In this case, it's spaceship, how quickly you want the spaceship to move, and we are going to change it later, and even in this video we'll see how it goes, if it moves too slowly or too fast. But anyways, right now we are going to decrease the value when the left key is pressed and increase the value when the right key is pressed. So what kind of change do we want in our X when we want the left arrow key is pressed? So we are going to just write over here player x underscore change, and we want to decrease the value by 0.1, let's say. And when the right arrow key is pressed, we want to increase this change by 0.1. So let's remove this minus value from over here. And when the key is released, we want the spaceship to stop moving. And that is why we want the change to be 0 when our keystroke is released. So over here, we are just going to paste this over here. So this is looking pretty good. Let's actually remove this comment from here. And then we can just add this player x change to our existing player x coordinate. So I'm just going to write player x plus equals to, and then player x change. So it doesn't matter whether we are adding over here, because we have given it a value of minus 0.1, and over here we are given it a positive value. So whenever something is added and the value is negative, so I'm just going to give you an example, all right, so that you guys can understand this arithmetic properly. You might be thinking that why are we adding over here, because we want to subtract this 0.1, right? So let's say our current value is 370. Let's say actually take a smaller value. Let's take our player x coordinate is 5, and then when we do plus equal to, so this basically means equals to 5 plus, and then the value that is player x underscore change. So right now this value is minus 0.1 if the key left is activated. So this value will be actually minus 0.1. So after this arithmetic is processed, this will turn actually into, so let me just add an arrow key, this will actually turn into 5 equals to 5 minus 0.1. And similarly, if we add, then the addition is pretty like obvious. So we can just add 0.1 and this will remain the same, just 0.1, and the value will be 5.1. So this is how this operator over here works. So we don't need to worry about whether we are subtracting or adding if we have added our arithmetic operator over here. In this case, it's minus. So this should be working. Let's run our main.py file and see if it is working. So let's activate it. And over here, when we press the left arrow key, our ship is moving. And when we press the right arrow key, our ship is moving. And when we release the keystroke, it is still moving. Why is that the case? So let's go over here and see. All right, so here the player x underscore change is 0.1. So we have to change it to value 0 because we don't want it to move. You can actually change it to 0.1 to see how it works, how the spaceship is stopping. So let's try it again. Now, when we move on the right hand direction and we release the keystroke, the ship actually stops. So this is looking pretty good, but the speed is a little bit slow. So I'm going to increase the value to 0.3. And now if we run it, our speed should be sufficiently well. So yeah, this is looking pretty good. In future, we'll change the 0.3 to a higher value when we use the clock concept, but we are not using it right now. So this is looking pretty good. Our spaceship is moving perfectly. And just to recap, what we did in this video was, first we checked whether any keystroke has been pressed on the keyboard, and then if the left keystroke is pressed, then we increase or decrease the value of player x change by 0.3. And if our right key is pressed, then we increase the value by 0.3. And whenever a keystroke has been released, we make sure that the player X coordinate stops changing, and that is why we have given it the value of 0 to make sure that the spaceship stops and doesn't go on. And then we just use this arithmetic thing over here, which increases the value of player X or decreases the value of player X depending upon the value of this player X underscore change. So this is looking pretty good. In the next video, if you have any queries, please ask them in questions. So this is pretty much it for this video. In the next video, we are gonna give our spaceship an enemy, because right now the space is looking very lonely for a spaceship. It's just going in the space and it's not finding any planets or any enemies. So it's thinking about its existence and the meaning of life. So what's happening with me? So we are gonna give it a meaning in the next video. So I'll see you over there. In the last video, we learned how to move our spaceship using our keyboard in the left and the right hand side direction. And in this video, I was about to give it some enemies, but then I realized our spaceship is just moving out of the screen when we go to the left and when we go to the right. So why is this happening? So when it goes to the right, this right border of the spaceship of our game window, it actually reaches the 800 width that we have set. And when it goes beyond this 800, it goes to maybe 810 and 805 pixels. So there's no restriction right now to the spaceship movement in the left and the right hand side direction. And similarly, when it moves to left hand side, it goes a little bit lesser than 0 and it goes into minus territory, because this x coordinate is an integer. That's why it can go to negatives, and even it can go to minus 450 or something. So what should we do? So what we are going to do is that when it reaches the 0 coordinate, then we are going to, anytime it goes into negative stuff, we are going to make sure that it stays at 0 by using an if condition. So we are going to basically tell our spaceship that, hey, if your x coordinate reaches 0 or less than 0, make sure it turns back to 0. And similarly, on the right hand side, we are going to tell our spaceship, if your x coordinate reaches this 800 x coordinate mark, then I don't want you to go beyond it, and change your x coordinate to 800 again. So every time it goes beyond 800, it's gonna just delete itself and go back to 800, but it's gonna happen so quickly that the eyes won't see it, and it will look like that the spaceship can't go beyond 800. So let's do that. Let's write an if condition just beyond this arithmetic operator we have over here. And as I said, we are just going to write player x. If this player x becomes less than 0, that is the x coordinate becomes less than 0, then we are going to change the value of player x to 0. And similarly, if our let's write lf player x becomes greater than or equal to 736 pixels. So why are we taking this 736 pixels instead of 800 pixels? So because our pixel, we have to take into consideration the size of our spaceship. So if you remember, the PNG size of the spaceship is 64 by 64 pixels. So the width of this spaceship is 64 pixels. That is why we are subtracting 64 from 800. And that means 736 pixels. So if we chose any other number, for example 800, then it will stop at this point and not before that. But we want it to stop over here and not allow any part of spaceship to appear beyond the game window. So that's why we are choosing this 736 pixel number. We just subtracted 64 from 800, and over here we are just gonna change the value of whenever it goes beyond 736, we want it to again go back to 736 x coordinate. And this will mean that it will look that it cannot go beyond, but it's just deleting that spaceship and creating a new one at 736 x coordinate pixel. So let's check this out, and hopefully it works well. Let's reload it and let's see if it works or not. So as you can see, when I press the right arrow key, it doesn't move beyond this, and feel free to try it yourself and change the x coordinates, just experiment with it a little bit. So the last video was pretty long and this video is pretty short, so that's good. So in the next video, we are finally going to create an enemy for a spaceship. So I'll see you over there. In the last video, we learned how to create boundaries for our spaceship so that it doesn't go out of bounds. In this video, we are going to give it our first enemy. So I've already downloaded an enemy image which looks like a happy space invader. But it's not going to be so happy when we shoot it with our spaceship. But anyways, let's get this icon from flaticon.com just like we always have, and search for Space Invaders and I'm going to go with this red space invader. You can select whatever you want and download the 64 by 64 picture as usual, and obviously in the PNG format. So now we can go back to our code, and just like we did with the player, we can add this enemy.png inside our code. So let's do that. Let's just copy this whole code and just add it below the player, change it to enemy. So we're gonna change everything to enemy, so we just have to rename everything. Let's call it enemy, and then I'm just gonna copy and paste this in the remaining areas. So let's just copy and paste everything, and instead of the player.png, we are gonna call it the enemy.png. And make sure you rename the PNG file, otherwise if you write enemy.png, it's not gonna work. But anyways, so we need to also create this function again. So let's just copy and paste this too. So we're gonna paste this over here. Instead of player, we are gonna call it enemy, and everything else should remain the same. Let's format it properly. Another thing is, in PyCharm, if you want to format everything properly, if you have written code that's not formatted and doesn't look good, what you can do is you can just press Control Alt and L, and it will format everything properly inside your code. So it's just Control L. So as you can see, it says imports optimized. It will just make your code look good. So again, the command is Control plus Alt plus L on your keyboard. So anyways, now that we have added the function of the enemy, let's just go down below and add the enemy over here, so that we can call the function while our while loop is running. So let's add the enemy over here, and instead of the player X, let's just call it enemy, and instead of the player X, we are going to call enemy X, and instead of player Y, we're going to give it a value of enemy Y. So right now you can see that the coordinates are the same as of the spaceship, so this should overlap our spaceship. So let's see if it's overlapping or not. So right now it's not overlapping. Let's actually check out why is that happening. So this is because inside our enemy function, we have not renamed this to enemy.emg. So let's do that. Let's rename it enemy.image, and then just reload it, and this should work properly. So now you can see that the enemy is on top of the spaceship, but this is not what we want. We want the enemy to be like somewhere on the top. So maybe in the middle, but on the top. So we can let the enemy X remain the same, but I'm going to change the enemy Y to something else. Let's give it a value of 50. I've already tried it out, and 50 looks pretty good. So let's see how it looks. All right, so our spaceship is moving and we have an enemy. But the problem with this enemy is that it's not moving. It's very boring. So we're going to fix that in the next video. But for right now, what I want is that this enemy should appear in the random places. So whenever we kill an enemy, it is going to appear again, or in the game terms, it's going to respawn again. So I want it to respawn in different places, maybe on different x-axis. So maybe over here after it's killed, and maybe in Y it should also appear in different places. So maybe next time over here, next time over here. So you want it to appear in different places. So every time it reloads, basically we want it to appear in different places, and even at the starting of the game, it should not be constant. It should be totally random. So what we are going to do is we are going to make this enemy X and enemy Y actually random. So we have to first write down the line that actually helps us randomize values. So we are going to import a package known as random, and this is pretty easy to do. So let me just minimize this over here and then scroll down, and over here we are just going to write, instead of 370, we are just going to write random dot randint. So this is a method inside the random package to choose a random integer between two values, and then we have to give it the value that we want. So we want a starting value and an end value. So in our game, we want it to appear anywhere between 0 and 800. So we are going to give it the starting value of 0 and the end value of 800. And similarly with Y, we wanted to give a value between maybe 50 and 150. So let's change this to 50. The 50 should be the starting point. So the minimum height should be 50, and then it can go till over here. Let's say 150. It's approximately 150. So I'm going to give it a value of 150. All right, guys. So this is looking pretty good. Let's just run it again and see if it works. So let's run main. All right. So this is working. It respawned over here. Let's reload it to see if it respawns somewhere else. So let's just reload it and see where this time it appears. This time it appears over here. Let's try the third time. Third time is a charm and it always works. So this time it appears over here. So our program is looking pretty good. We have created an enemy and it is respawning in different places. So this is just looking pretty good. In the next video, we are going to make sure that our enemy moves. So right now our enemy is stationary. It's not moving from the left or the right and it's not going down. So we are going to make sure that we rectify that in the next video. It's going to be really exciting. So I'll see you over there. So in the last video, we created our enemy and made sure we applied randomization to our enemy so that when it gets destroyed and created again, it should appear in random places. So as you can see, when we reload our program, it's going to respawn in a different place. So in this video, we are going to make sure that our enemy is moving. So imagine that there are multiple enemies. Right now there is just one enemy and we haven't created multiple enemies, so there is not any problem. But imagine there are multiple enemies and they are moving from left to right, and they're also, when they hit the boundary, they come a little bit down. So that's what we are going to be focusing on today. We are not going to be creating multiple enemies, but we are going to be focusing on the movement of this one single enemy, and then we can apply it to multiple enemies. But let's for right now just focus on one enemy. So what exactly do we want from this enemy? What kind of movement do we want? So what we want it to do is move from right to left in X direction. So for example, this enemy will move in the right hand side, and when it hits the boundary, that is about 736 or 800 pixels, it should change its direction and move towards the left hand side. And when it reaches the left hand side, then again when it hits that 0 coordinate, X coordinate, then it should again change its direction and move towards the right hand side. So this is the movement in the X direction. Now there is also a movement in the Y direction. So whenever it hits a boundary, whether it can be right boundary or the left boundary, then it should come a little bit down. So that imagine there are multiple enemies and we are trying to shoot all of those enemies down. So how will the game get over? So whenever these enemies hit the boundaries and come down, at one point of time they are going to hit the spaceship as they are coming down, and then we'll make it game over, like in the classic Space Invader. So we need to execute the X movement and as well as we need to execute the Y movement. Now this is going to be very easy because you already know how to move the spaceship, and we are going to do the same thing that we did in the player. So first of all, we'll just scroll up. Let's minimize this over here. So we're going to slow up, and because our enemy is going to have the exchange as well as the Y movement, so I'm just going to copy this over here and also make sure that we add a Y movement. Now enemy exchange over here, we are going to give it the value of 0.3. Maybe in future we'll speed it up because our spaceship is also at the speed of or exchange of 0.3. Maybe we'll change it up on future, but right now I'm just going to give it a value of 0.3. Now I'm not giving it a value. So for example, in player, we have just given it a value of 0 over here, and below over here we have changed its direction by typing in negative and positive. We are not going to do this with our enemy. We are just going to provide the value of 0.3 over here. Now if we scroll down, we are just going to do the same thing that we did with our player. So for example, over here we made sure that if it hit the boundary, so this is the algorithm basically. You can call it the algorithm, but it's pretty simple. So whenever it hits the 0 coordinate, we change its value to 0, and whenever it gets greater than 736, we make sure that its coordinates get to 736 again, and this prevents the spaceship from going out of bounds. So this is a kind of way of checking the boundary. So we can do the same thing with our enemy. So let me just copy and paste this over here, and instead of everywhere player, we are just going to call it enemy. So E should be in small. So over here also, let me just copy actually enemy and paste it everywhere. This is gonna make sure that we save up some time, not a lot of time, but so let's paste this enemy over here, I wish there was a quicker way to do it, but it's not. So anyways, now I'm just gonna add a comment over here so that you guys can understand what we are talking about over here. So checking for boundaries of spaceship so it doesn't go out of bounds. And over here we're just gonna write maybe enemy movement, and this looks pretty good. Now instead of restricting us, what we want is whenever a boundary is hit, we want it to go someplace. So for example, when it hits that left boundary, we want to increase the value of X so that it starts going in the right hand side direction, and similarly when it hits this right hand side boundary, then we want to decrease the value of x, and this will keep on happening because it's inside our while loop. So now we are going to use the same arithmetic operation that we used with our player. So if we scroll up a little bit, you can see when we wanted to change directions, we give when we wanted to move towards the left, we gave it a value of minus, and when we wanted to move towards the right, we gave it a positive value of 0.3, and then we just added because of this arithmetic property. So we are going to do the same thing over here. So instead of enemy x equals to 0, what we are going to do is we are going to write enemy x change equals to 0.3, and so that basically when it hits this left hand side, that is the 0 coordinate, it can start going towards a positive direction, that is it should start increasing the x value. And similarly when we want it to go left hand side, we are going to change it to a minus value. So we are going to give it a value of minus, and this should be enough, guys. So, and actually if I scroll up, you can see that I have put the value of enemy x underscore change equals to 0.3. We can leave it to 0 or we can leave it to 0.3, it doesn't really matter. So let's run it and see if it works. Let me just close down the previous implementation so that we don't get confused. And I'm just gonna run it again, run main, and hopefully the enemy will start moving. So you can see that the enemy is moving from left hand side to right hand side, and actually this looks pretty awesome. So now you can see that it's not moving in the y direction, it's just moving in the x direction. So what we want is that when it hits the right boundary, it should move downwards, or even if it hits the left boundary, it should move a little bit downwards. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna add enemy y change equals to 40, so that we can move it down by 40 pixels. So when do we want it to move down? We want it to move down when it hits the boundary, that is the 0 coordinate or the 736 coordinate. So we can just increase the value of y over here, and that should be enough. So I'm just going to write enemy y plus equals to, and then we want the enemy y change. Let's just paste over here, and then we can do the same thing over here. Let's not erase that, let's just add it over here. So now let's just reload it and see how it looks. So now you can see when it hits the boundary, it actually goes a little bit down. So you can imagine multiple enemies, when they are hitting the boundary, they are going down. So it's going to be a little bit difficult for a spaceship to eliminate all of them, but it's going to try its best. And when this enemy reaches this spaceship, we are going to give it a game over. And depending upon how many enemies we can hit with our bullet, which we'll be creating mostly in the next video or in the coming up videos, depending upon how many enemies he can eliminate with that bullet, the score is going to be according to that. So you can kind of get the idea of the game with this video as to how the game was going to look. So today we are going to be learning about adding background image to our pygame. So right now, if we open up our space invader game, you will be able to see that we have an enemy, we have a spaceship, but it's happening in the black background, which doesn't look that good. We need to add some kind of a space background to make it very cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm already downloaded an image of a background, that is background.png, and it somewhat looks like this. So how did I get this image? So what I did was I went to this website called freepik.com, P-I-K, and then freepik.com, and I searched for this text which says colorful spaceship background. Obviously feel free to get an image from wherever you want, but make sure you get an image that's 800 into 600 pixels. Why is that size? Because our game window is of that size. As you can see, we have made a game window of this area. So what I did was I went over there, and you can choose any of these images, but the image that I chose was this one, and then I used Illustrator. So Freepik is a website which is going to give you a lot of Illustrator, Photoshop stuff, and you have to edit it out to make it your own. So I removed all of the weird stuff that we didn't want. For example, this rocket, this text and stuff. So I removed all of that stuff. And if you know Illustrator, feel free to make a new image on your own. So what I'm going to do for you guys, if you're not able to get this image on your own, is that I'm going to attach it to the description or attach it somewhere so that you guys can get this image. Just look at this video's text. So what I'm going to do is, after we download this background image to our project folder, make sure you do that. Then we are just going to add it to our windows. So over here, how do we add images to our program is just by pygame.image.load. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to add a comment, let's say, and we are going to write just background. Let's just write background, and then I'm going to create a variable called background. And I'm going to do the same thing that we did with the rest. So I'm just going to copy and paste it over here, and instead of UFO I'm going to write background. So obviously my image is of 800 into 600 pixels, so make sure it is of that size. So now that we have added it, if we run it right now, it's not going to appear because it just appears for a second and then it disappears. We want it to persist. So how do we make it persist is by adding it to our while loop. So we need to make sure that we go to our while loop over here, and we are going to add it just below the screen.fill, because if we don't, then this black color is going to be on top of our background image, which we don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add another comment over here, which is going to say background image, and we forgot the B, so let's add B. And then over here we are just going to do the screen, just typical thing we do when we want to add an image, which is screen.blit. So basically draw the background image, and then we need the variable of the image, so that is background, and then we need to add the coordinates of our image. So we just want it to appear from the top left corner, so we are going to add 0, 0, and that should be pretty good. So let's run our main.py program. Let's run main, and you'll be able to see that our background is there. But the problem with the background and our enemy and a spaceship is now that they are moving very, very slowly. And why is this? So if you want to pause this video and figure it on your own, that would be pretty cool. But I'm just going to explain it over here. So our background.png is actually 226 pixels, 226 KB. So it's a little bit heavy. But what happens is when this while loop is running, every iteration of this while loop previously used to happen really, really fast. But now because it has to load this heavy background image, the iteration of this while loop, every iteration is a little bit more slow. So that is why whenever we are increasing the